But I do find there's still the folks who, partners included, this is not mine. My partner needs to deal with that, and then we'll all be better.
Yeah.
And what they're not knowing is they're being impacted. They have been impacted. And so when they start to come in for help, and then they start to go, oh, I didn't realize that this was probably connected to that. Oh, this is probably so then they start seeing the levels and layers to the impact
Hmm.
that they've experienced, which is why it's so important. So if anyone's out there and you're thinking maybe this is you, please reach out and do a little bit of research, because there's a lot of resources, and you don't
Yeah.
have to engage with professionals if you're not ready. Just looking online at quality, up to date information. But a lot's out there.
Yeah. Well, I like the fact, Jeannie, that you're referring to it as partner care, because I think that's one of the problems we can face is if both spouses get the message of, well, you need help as the addict and you need help as the spouse, or you both have things to fix or to work on. And some of that is the co-addict model of, well, yeah, you made the choices, but there were things in your relationship that were enabling you, or where the spouse was, they need to fix stuff about them too. And it's like, whoa, 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 this is not my problem. We don't both need to be fixed. But if we have this mentality that says, you need to work on a problem, but you as the spouse, you need care. You
Mm-hmm.
need support. And, we've often used the metaphor of a car accident because I think it works in that it's a traumatic event. And maybe the driver, in this case being the addict or struggler, they made bad choices about how to drive and they need work on some driving skill or to correct their decisions. But everyone else in the car was impacted by what happened, and they are going to need care. They're going to need support. They're going to need to heal. And when you start using that kind of language for a spouse to say, how has this impacted your mental well being? Does this keep you up at night? Do you have a hard time sleeping or functioning when you're worried about what's been happening in your marriage, or what is your spouse doing? And when they say, well, yeah, but if they just fix the problem, doesn't that get better? Well, no. We see that you're going to need a process of care as well to understand what's happened to you and what does it look like to heal, to be able to walk in a place where you're stable, where you're secure, even if, as we see in situations, even if they don't do their work, you're going to need care because you were in the car, you were in
Mm-hmm.
the accident, and we want to support you however we can. And to help that mindset along, I think does shift people away from just fixing the problem like we talked about, or thinking that both people have things to fix.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Instead talking about it as care. So in terms of trauma, Jeannie, at AppSets, how do you define trauma? Because the question might be, does every partner who is
Mm-hmm.
married to someone that's acting out with pornography or other unwanted sexual behavior, is there always trauma? Or are there some cases where you might say, well, no, their trauma isn't the case here? What does that look like?
Yeah, I would say not all partners experience trauma. There are some partners who enter into relationships with knowledge and awareness that this addiction is a struggle or this person's in recovery. I don't think, and I've worked with some of those folks who don't feel like that necessarily is a match for them. See, and here's the thing is that we're not saying everybody is traumatized. We're saying lots of people are. And for those who are, you're not crazy,
Hmm.
not making this up. What you're experiencing is trauma symptomology, which is very treatable, which can really, if you get in with a skilled person, you can have profound changes and heal and create this new level of functioning for yourself. So I do not think every betrayed partner has trauma. And I'd say lots of betrayed partners feel trauma on a spectrum of intensity.
Sure.
Hmm.
So when we say, well, what is trauma? I go back to the good Dr. Barbara Steffens and her original study, which showed that 69 point something percent of the betrayed partners that she surveyed qualified for the diagnosis of PTSD.
Hmm.
Now, just to review, PTSD has numerous features to it. And actually, I created a slide for ABSATs, well, in my presentations outside of ABSATs, but brought it to ABSATs, which goes down the PTSD symptomology, and it shows you how betrayed partners may,
Sure.
not
Yeah.
always, experience these things. So when we're talking about, a heightened sense of arousal or reactivity, This is that short fuse. This is that trigger response. This is 0 to Mach 100s, in seconds. The mood volatility, happy, sad, scared, fearful, happy again, all in 25 minutes. So then there's also the avoidance. I don't want to talk about it, or I don't want to see those people, or I don't want to go driving near those locations, or we call intrusive thoughts, nightmares. I'm in the garden and suddenly I'm thinking about this behavior, or I haven't seen any acting out, but now I'm having images of it because my brain has created this imagery and it's intrusive. So those are the kinds of things that we would say create or the symptomology of trauma. Not everybody who experiences trauma can be diagnosed as PTSD. It's not what I'm saying, but I'm saying a significant number of people
Yeah.
experience these traumatic symptoms.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes
As
sense.
as a as a follow-up question to that, Jeannie, and I think this we observe this, but it can be a little tough to know how to approach it, is you do have spouses that might say, I'm not traumatized, I don't need group, and for a legitimate reason. And then you also have spouses that say that because they're in a form of trauma blocking or trauma avoidance. And it's easier to say, well, I have no trauma, when the truth is they have so much trauma, they don't want to face it.
Mm.
And that can be delicate because you obviously don't want to go in accusing someone like, well, you're just blocking, you're just avoiding. That can only make it worse. So how do you navigate that, and what response do you have for someone when you sense like you're saying you have no trauma, but I think maybe what's going on here is a form of trauma blocking or trauma avoidance?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. So now this is Jeannie Vitoni responding, not an absatz responding, or a little bit of both.
Sure.
Hmm.
I think it's the gentle approach,
Hmm.
and that definitely would be an absatz as well, is the non-judgmental, non-critical approach. If you're feeling like this is not your experience, okay, would you mind if I shared some information? And you tell me if this matches anything for you.
Sure.
I think when you enter into it gently that way, people, I kind of say, I'll throw all these things up in the air. Which one, if any, are a
Yeah.
match for you? And then they hear their story
Hmm.
as I'm describing some of these pieces. Have you ever had this or wondered about that? Have you ever had this and wondered about that? So I think the important way is to not walk in and say, you're traumatized, therefore you need fixing. By the way, I really bristle at that word fix because I'm with you.
Absolutely.
I'm like, that's not fixing. But to walk in gently and we say, come alongside, how can I help you in this moment? Here are some things to ponder if you would. Would you mind if I shared? Because you're not going to get anywhere, and nor do you want to make assumptions about someone else's internal world. So I'd say just a lot of respect and gentle approach.
Yeah. You know what
Teach.
I love about that, Genie, is it does mimic what I think we need to do at times with the struggler or the addict. Because if you start to use words like addiction, there is many times a visceral response like, whoa, 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 I'm not an addict, or it's not compulsive sexual behavior. And to have that kind of open, non-judgmental response, say, oh, I appreciate that. Let me ask about a couple of things. Do you ever find that you're often preoccupied by these thoughts? Have you tried to stop and yet you find you go back? Have you promised a spouse or family member you're going to change only to find that a month or a year later you've gone back? And you start listing some of those things, say, well, I love what you said. They find their story. They say, well, yeah, that's isn't that everybody, or isn't that reality? It's like, well, no, that's a part of how we define compulsive behavior or addiction. And maybe you've minimized, but these are realities. And then that can open them up to see, maybe I need to pursue help and recovery more than I thought,
Mhm.
when you have that approach.
Yeah, and I'm thinking the word is normalization.
Hmm.
When you only know your internal or your coupleship's experience,
Hmm.
it becomes normalized. And so, wait, like you said, well, isn't this everyone's experience? Well, actually, no, we're describing something that is difficult for a lot of folks over here. But betrayed partners will do that too, especially when it's one of the very first relationships or their first sexual relationships. Some things become normalized. And so they don't know that it could be different or it would be, our descriptive maybe unhealthy.
Yeah.
And so there is that, let me share information and let's see if some of this connects to you, and then we'll take it from there.